The restaurant buzzed with laughter and clinking glasses, but Amelia felt like an outsider looking in. She was a single mom who had promised herself she'd never again step into the unpredictable world of dating, yet tonight she sat alone at a corner table, waiting for a blind date who had already made it painfully clear he wasn't interested. He had mumbled a quick excuse, barely meeting her eyes, before leaving her with nothing more than a half-empty glass of water and the sting of rejection. Amelia didn't care about herself as much as she cared about the way people often judged her little boy, Noah, who sat beside her coloring quietly, his presence a reminder that her life was not her own. Just as she prepared to leave, she noticed a man across the room. His date had stormed out, leaving him staring blankly at the floor. Something about his expression struck her, the weight of loneliness, the silent plea of someone who had spent too long hiding behind polite smiles. Without thinking twice, Amelia stood up, guided Noah by the hand, and walked toward him. "Rough night?" she asked gently, her voice carrying both empathy and courage. The man looked up, startled, and for the first time that evening, he smiled, not the polished smile of someone used to impressing others, but the raw, grateful smile of a soul who had just been seen. What Amelia didn't know was that this simple act of kindness was the beginning of something extraordinary, something that would change both their lives forever. He introduced himself as Daniel, his voice carrying the polished confidence of someone accustomed to boardrooms and formal dinners, yet beneath it was a tremor she couldn't miss. Amelia slid into the chair across from him, Noah climbing into her lap as if sensing this stranger wasn't a threat. "Looks like we both had a bad night," she said softly, trying to ease the tension. Daniel chuckled, though his eyes betrayed the sadness of a man who had built walls around his heart. To Amelia, he looked nothing like the cold, untouchable men she often imagined when hearing the word CEO, though she had no way of knowing the title belonged to him. All she saw was a lonely man abandoned in the middle of dinner. Daniel, on the other hand, was quietly struck by her courage. Most people avoided vulnerability, but here was this woman, struggling single mom by the look of her faded jacket and the weary patience in her eyes, choosing kindness when she could have chosen indifference. Noah, ever the unfiltered child, pushed his drawing toward Daniel. "You can have this. It's a rocket ship." Daniel blinked, momentarily stunned by the boy's generosity. He took the paper as though it were a priceless treasure. "Thank you," he whispered, his throat tightening unexpectedly. Amelia smiled, the kind of smile that made weary hearts feel lighter. In that moment, Daniel realized something that shook him more than any corporate crisis ever had. He wasn't just sharing a table with a stranger. He was being offered a glimpse of family, warmth, and belonging, things money had never been able to buy him. The evening stretched longer than either of them expected. What began as awkward small talk soon unraveled into stories. Amelia spoke of juggling 2 jobs, the endless bills, and the quiet moments with Noah that kept her going. She didn't sugarcoat the exhaustion, yet every word was laced with gratitude for the little boy who had given her life meaning again. Daniel listened, captivated, realizing he couldn't remember the last time someone had spoken so honestly to him without carefully choosing words to impress or appease. Most people saw only his wealth, his status, or the doors he could open. Amelia, however, spoke as if he were simply another human being, flawed and searching. When she asked about him, he hesitated. He told her bits and pieces, how work often consumed his nights, how empty his home felt despite its grandeur. He didn't mention his title or the empire he managed. Instead, he admitted, almost sheepishly, "Sometimes I wonder if people ever see me, or just what I represent." Amelia tilted her head, her eyes soft. "I see you," she said simply, and for Daniel, those 3 words landed like a revelation. Noah had fallen asleep against his mother's shoulder, his small breath steady and innocent, and Daniel found himself envying the boy, not for youth, but for the unconditional love he so clearly received. Something stirred deep inside him, an ache he had ignored for too long. He had entered the restaurant expecting another forgettable evening, but sitting across from Amelia, Daniel realized this night might just be the one he would never forget. When the check arrived, Amelia instinctively reached for it, though her heart sank knowing her wallet held barely enough to cover the simplest meal. Daniel gently stopped her hand, shaking his head with a quiet smile. "Please, allow me," he said. For him, it was a small gesture, but for Amelia, it was a reminder of how often she had carried burdens alone. She hesitated, pride tugging at her, but the kindness in his eyes softened her resistance. "Thank you," she whispered. As they walked outside into the crisp night air, snowflakes drifting lazily from the sky, Amelia wrapped her coat tighter around Noah, who was still fast asleep. Without thinking, Daniel shrugged off his own expensive jacket and draped it over her shoulders. "You'll catch cold," he said gently. Amelia blinked, surprised not by the gesture itself but by the sincerity with which it was offered. In that quiet moment, something unspoken passed between them. A fragile connection built not on wealth or appearances, but on simple, human care. Daniel found himself longing to prolong the evening, to hold on to the warmth Amelia brought into his otherwise sterile life. "Can I walk you home?" he asked, uncertain for the first time in years. Amelia studied him, searching for hidden motives, but all she saw was truth. With a small nod, she agreed, and together they began the walk through the softly lit streets. For Daniel, each step beside her felt like a departure from the world he had always known, and the first step into one he had silently prayed for but never believed could exist. The walk home was quiet, yet filled with an ease neither of them expected. Streetlights cast long shadows as Amelia spoke softly about Noah's dreams, how he wanted to be an astronaut, how he built rocket ships from cereal boxes and believed anything was possible. Daniel listened, struck by the purity of it. He realized he had once dreamed that way too, before success had turned wonder into obligation. When they reached Amelia's modest apartment building, she apologized for its worn appearance, embarrassed by peeling paint and creaky steps. But Daniel didn't see flaws. He saw warmth in the way a child's drawings decorated the hallway, in the small shoe rack by the door, in the simple signs of life and love. She invited him in for tea, hesitant yet hopeful. Inside, he noticed the chipped mugs, the second-hand furniture, the scent of lavender candles that tried to mask the thinness of the walls. And yet, it felt more like home than his mansion ever had. As Amelia tucked Noah into bed, Daniel stood in the doorway, watching the tenderness in her every gesture. It stirred something he hadn't let himself feel in years, a longing not just for companionship, but for belonging. When Amelia returned, she offered him tea with an apologetic smile. "It's nothing fancy," she said. He took it gratefully, meeting her eyes. "It's perfect," he replied. For the first time in a long time, Daniel wasn't thinking about meetings or shareholders. He was thinking about how a single act of kindness had led him here, and how he didn't want this night to end. As the night drew to a close, Amelia walked Daniel to the door, unsure if she would ever see him again. She had learned to guard her heart, to expect little, and yet tonight felt different, like life had opened a small window of possibility. Daniel lingered, reluctant to step back into the polished, empty world that awaited him. He glanced at Amelia, at the gentle strength in her eyes, and felt a certainty he couldn't ignore. "You know," he said softly, "I came here tonight expecting another failed attempt at connection. But then you walked over. You didn't have to. You could have ignored me like everyone else did. Instead, you saw me." Amelia's breath caught, his words echoing the very loneliness she had sensed in him. "Sometimes," she whispered, "all it takes is one person willing to care." For a long moment, silence wrapped around them, broken only by the hum of the city outside. Daniel reached into his pocket, not for a business card, but for courage. "Amelia, would you let me see you again?" Her eyes widened, but the warmth of his sincerity left no room for doubt. A slow smile spread across her face. "Yes," she answered, her voice trembling with hope. As he walked away into the night, Daniel carried not just her yes, but the rocket ship drawing folded carefully in his pocket, a reminder that love, family, and belonging were not luxuries money could buy, but gifts born of kindness. And though Amelia hadn't known it when she walked him out of that disastrous blind date, Daniel had already found his way into her heart, and she into his.